Hey. All right, so I'm going to say a couple things about conclusions. But as a way of kind of segueing into that, I think it's worth putting this in context to what we've been trying to do really all semester long, which is to really get away from a view of writing, a view of guiding yourself through the process of writing that's grounded in thou shalt nots, that's grounded in dogmas, and toward a way of making writing decisions that really gets into the question of what is the difference between using this word or not using it? What is the difference between doing something one way versus another? Um, Breaking down the dogmas and thinking very critically about the decisions you make and their effects on readers. And so we've covered a lot of these. I think we've talked about don't start a sentence with and or but. That one's pretty groundless. There's no reason to never start a sentence with and or but. It's actually even difficult to figure out where that one even comes from. Avoiding passive voice, well, that one has a little bit more going for it. There are plenty of situations where passive voice can be a problem. Passive constructions probably should be used sparingly. It's still a problem that it's asserted as a dogma, of course, because you may find situations where passive construction sounds better or emphasizes the right part of the sentence for you or otherwise achieves your purposes more effectively than an active construction. Don't use I is another one. That's something that people have had pounded into them as a dogma, and it's extremely counterproductive because often people who have that impression have never were never told why. And so the worst part is, in some cases, those are students who end up writing the word one as a pronoun instead of I, which they mean exactly the same thing, and so it essentially comes with all the same drawbacks, except it sounds a little more awkward. So that one really backfires. Some people have had it dogmatically hammered into them that they shouldn't use Wikipedia, which is really, really freaking terrible if you think about what Wikipedia is and what an amazing resource it is and just how incredibly useful it is. And how there's other online encyclopedias, but there's nothing quite like Wikipedia. There's nothing as quick and user-friendly and just all around awesome. And so yeah, those are some examples of dogmas you've tried to get away from and think more critically about it in every case. Does using I in this sentence make this sound more subjective than I tend it to? Would this passive construction be stronger as an active construction? And so on and so forth. Asking the questions rather than, again, trying to be in compliance with some kind of thou shalt not list. Okay, so sometimes people also come in with very strange ideas about how they should be writing conclusions. And to be honest, this actually isn't something I've ever talked about before in this class, any of the previous times I've taught it. And I'm not sure what the reason is for that. I think part of it is students tend to have fairly good instincts for how to conclude their papers. At least I haven't noticed a lot of problems in the past. They seem to be really thinking for themselves and obeying their best instincts more often than not. But the other thing is, I really just thought it would go without saying. I don't think I've ever read a book chapter or a magazine column or a critical scholarly journal article or a blog or really anything that had where the last paragraph was the kind of paragraph was like a high school essay conclusion paragraph. I assumed it was just obvious that those aren't real, that isn't how people really write. But it's still worth getting into a little bit. And what I actually did was I actually gathered together some concluding paragraphs of various sources. I've got the concluding paragraph here of Robert Muir Wood's The Cure for Catastrophe, or the concluding paragraph of the first chapter of that book. That's a book I'm assigning my other class. The final paragraph of David Benatar's Why It Is Better to Never Come into Existence, a academic journal article that I've posted to Blackboard for you guys. The final paragraph of chapter 1 of Donald Murray's The Craft of Revision, a book about writing. The final paragraph of Megan McArdle's Washington Post column, When Washington Abandoned Policymaking, It Gave Up Trying to Improve People's Lives. McArdle's columns are always great. Just can't get enough of them. The Greatest Football Card Nobody Talks About from Sports Illustrated. Got the final paragraph of that. The final paragraph from Stephen Landsberg's blog post, Quick Thoughts on Kavanaugh. The final paragraph of Nancy Summers' essay on revision. The final paragraph of chapter 9 of Tom Flynn's The Trouble with Christmas. That's what you'll be reading for Friday, I think. The final paragraph of Marvin Minsky's Will Robots Inherit the Earth, which I think you read a little while ago. The final paragraph of Reason magazine piece called When the World Convulsed George H.W. Bush Mostly Let Freedom Happen. The final paragraph of Chris Westling's piece for NFL.com, Value of Colin Kaepernick's Activism Aside, QB Skills Are Suspect. And, the final paragraph of the Sports Illustrated column, Packers firing Mike McCarthy is jarring but not unexpected. Okay, so that's a lot of concluding paragraphs. It's a lot of concluding paragraphs and a good variety of different kinds of sources. A couple academic sources, a couple, several sources of journalism, some sports writing, some books, some book chapters. So a little bit of everything. But I really wanted to look through those to kind of assess how accurate it is. And then these really are just the first 13 things I could find. So it's a small sample size, but fairly representative, I would think. And so the idea that I'm trying to push back against a little bit is that the concluding paragraph should reiterate what's come before, should restate things that have already been stated, and shouldn't introduce new information. And if we subject that to scrutiny, I think there's value in asking the question, why? Why would you simply restate things that were already abundantly clear? Why would you say things you've already said? Why reiterate for the sake of reiteration? There's not really a great argument for why that's a good thing to do at the end of the essay. And don't introduce new information. That's a very, very vague rule, and that's the question. I think it provokes the question, what precisely does that mean? Does that mean don't introduce new facts? Or is it broad, or is it implying don't introduce new arguments or questions or perspectives or metaphors or quotations? Either way, it doesn't seem to be true of most actual conclusion paragraphs out there. Of the 13 I'm compiled, pretty much none of them follow this model. Many of them have quotations. Many of them introduce new factual information. Many of them ask new questions. Some of them do, to some extent, reiterate things that have kind of been said before, but they usually do so in a way that's different, in a way that makes you think differently about those things. So I think a good rule of thumb would be, if you have a sentence in your conclusion paragraph that sounds very similar to a sentence you have somewhere else in your essay, it might be a good idea to think about, do I really believe that this is adding anything in the way of meaning? Is this conveying something to the reader that I wouldn't be able to convey to them without it? Is there any value in this? But yeah, the last sentence from Robert Muirwood's The Cure for Catastrophe, Chapter 1. There are no tsunami walls along the Pacific coast of Chile. In the Great Nightmare Chile earthquake and tsunami of 2010, some 200 people were drowned. In the daytime 2011 Japan tsunami, despite or because of the tsunami walls, the toll was 20,000. Now, I don't want to read too many of these because I think there are limits to how much you can gain from seeing the concluding paragraph without the essay that comes before it. But you'll notice that Wood did introduce pretty specific factual information about 2 specific earthquakes that happened, and ends on that note. Now, and if you read the chapter, it'll be clear why that's kind of an interesting note for him to end on. But I think part of what it comes back to is it's very hard to give general instructions for writing a conclusion. It requires a lot of creativity. It requires self-knowledge. You have to ask yourself the question, what more do I still need to say? What's a good thing? What of value can I leave the reader with? And so there's not an easy kind of blueprint for creating that, but it's something to think about. I guess what I'm thinking about now is, I'm less interested in people having a set of steps or an item of advice on how to write a good introduction or a good conclusion, and more interested in, are they asking themselves the right questions? And those questions are the question like, what would be a valuable thing to leave the reader with? What do I still feel like I have to say? And I'll leave you with that.